The next speaker we have with us today is Ms. Neelam Singh. Neelam is the the co-author of the Child Online Safety Protection Report by UNICEF. She is a consultant and researcher supporting the policies, plans, programs and advocacy initiatives of organizations and government agencies within as well as outside of India. Neelam specializes in multidisciplinary situation assessments and analysis, reviews and evaluations on critical and emerging issues of children with a focus on gender, generation, participation and protection. One of her recent projects has become an assessment of child online protection in India, which is the safety report by UNICEF. She is an alumni of the University of Delhi, Indian Institute of Mass Communications and Institute of Development Studies, Sussex. Today, Neelam is going to share with us some insights from the report that she co-authored, and we are very happy to have you with us.
Let me begin with the work that I do, where I try to support the work that you all are engaged with in at the policy level, programs, also generation of resources, monitoring, evaluation. And for the last 25 years, I have been associated with children's rights, and in the course of my work, I've had the opportunity of learning from many of you the dynamics and intricacies of child protection, including child sexual abuse and exploitation. And more recently, about 2 years ago, I was introduced to the online dimensions of child abuse and exploitation. Now, when the work that we embarked upon, it was, the basic idea was to see what we, I'll start off with the background of what this report was all about, what we did, but it also raised a number of issues. Some we could not address because of our terms of reference, but which we feel are important. When I say we, here I also speak on behalf of my colleague Karuna Bishnoi, who's not with us, and some of our advisors. Two of them are here, Karnika and Vidya. So this report was done as part of the We Protect initiative, which was started by the British government to look at the online issues of sexual abuse and exploitation. And also it had developed a national response analysis which we drew upon. However, while designing the study in India, we thought that it would be important not to confine ourselves to the sexual dimensions, because the non-sexual parts are also important. Also, it would allow us the ability to engage with people who have who are very nervous whenever one talks about matters of child sex. It would be much more acceptable, and we would be able to bring in the issue as well by dealing with the resistance that we knew that would come from various sources. So we looked at the available research. Many countries under the We Protect umbrella, they have formed a global kids online research, and country level studies have been done. India could not take part in those studies because the usual permissions had to be again. So the idea was that let's go for a base document which provides us a picture of the overall situation. So we looked at what we know and what are the gaps in knowledge that could be taken up in the future endeavors through research. So we looked at all known online risks, threats, including sexual abuse and exploitation. There were a few assumptions that the other issues, including issues of radicalization and the technical issues, They were also important, especially as the policy environment was changing, and the Digital India and all these programs were being introduced by the government. Then a comprehensive approach might be a more effective and efficient way of dealing with things. So if we are to look at the protective policies and legislation, are we looking at the issue of the effectiveness of mechanisms, capacities available with different level of people at the national, state and local levels? Are we looking at how families respond to such issues? Do children have the knowledge, information and connections that they could draw upon? What kind of monitoring and evaluation and knowledge systems do we have, whether they allow us to capture the basic knowledge that would help us take forward the agenda? When we looked at the available data on India, we realized that there was precious little. A lot of surveys had been done, and most of them, they were, number one, urban-centric, and they used the online methodologies. So while we got the numbers, and those numbers that were generated through these surveys, we were not very clear about the methodology, that how exactly they were done and how representative would they be. The companies, the IT companies who undertook these surveys, the basic idea was that they wanted to make available their platform to people as something that, as a place that was safe. So they went into generating data from their perspective, and it didn't help us much. It did tell us a bit about that, okay, children are more savvy than their parents. Children probably know much more about the risks online than their parents. But that was it. We did not really know much about the peri-urban and rural areas, where much of the action was taking place and will continue to take place in the coming years. When we also looked at the data, at that time the diffusion rate was just about 26%, but which translates into huge numbers. And the industry estimates are that in the next 2-3 years, the expansion would be highest in the rural areas, peri-urban areas, and the medium would be the mobile phone. Now, there were some challenges that were also important. Some of them, they are implicit in the child protection, about capacities, about the limitations of law. But there were some which were pertinent only to the online issues. And here we had to look at how do people behave online, and especially how do children, especially in adolescence. It's an age where they are exploring things, they want to know more. They know much more than their parents, at least on how to operate the technology, even if their ability to judge the risks or to think about what they could be letting themselves into if that was suspect. So the technology continues to expand at a rapid pace. There are the risk-taking. That was a lot of people that we talked with, especially those who work with children, people who do these workshops, orientation sessions on online issues, lawyers, and also the organizations that work on child protection. And everywhere, the common theme was that what's happening is scary. But also they felt that there is a lot that children themselves can do, because the peer influence is important. So children were coming out seeking help, if not necessarily approaching their parents or their teachers. So there were very few people who are there in the country who have that connect. And some of the observations that they came up with were very interesting, very important. But we could not use it in our research because as a researcher, the information has to follow a certain method. The protocols have to be there. It has to be validated. We couldn't do that, but I would like to share it here. One person who has conducted thousands of workshops with children in schools and in colleges, including girls. He talked about 40 to 50 phone calls every day that he receives. Children who have got a problem because of sexting. Sexting, it's not only the inappropriate words, but also taking pictures of their private parts. And here one felt that the fact that many of these issues are non-contact, they generate a sense of complacency. Children do not think that it's they are sort of subjecting themselves to any major risk till they find themselves really caught up in a situation. The second one was about the role of girls. Now, the anonymity, patriarchal society that live in, and the repressive norms that govern our lives as girls and women, there is always this desire to experiment. And we found that a lot of girls, they would either assume male identities, or they would experiment with language, the content, which sort of went against the accepted norms. That was an interesting feature, and which also to some extent explained that why there were more cases of cyberbullying faced by boys than girls. Is it because it's an issue of access? Is it because they do not reveal themselves? Or is it because they feel that they would face repercussions if they informed others, their teachers or the parents, and in many situations the way they use technologies, that is sort of limited. There are also, when the cases were reported, most of them, the parents do not want them to be taken up. They want the companies to help out, the lawyers, the policemen. And even the policemen are very happy not dealing with them because there is this issue of jurisdiction. Where are you going to record the case? The servers are in the West. The companies, they have to follow a certain norm. The legal process is cumbersome. And many of these policemen, the senior police officials told us that the younger lot, they are more technologically savvy, but then there was a counter question that are they, even if they know the technology, but do they have the required wisdom that how to deal with children, especially adolescents, and not be judgmental in taking up these cases. The role of industry, we found, was quite interesting in the sense that they have been working on technical solutions. A lot of us, we don't look at there are a lot of provisions whether we can limit who the information is shared with. We can report, we can block, we can do many things. They also have a lot of educational material that can be used with children, with parents, which many of us, in fact, at least I hadn't explored till I started working on this area. Then it's also about dealing with, so 5 minutes, I'll be quick. Then there is this issue of dark net, and which hasn't been talked much about. Though the technologies are available, but not so much in India. So how do we approach, how do we go about seeking help? That remains a major issue. So in this situation, there are some key issues. One is that ultimately we have to focus on prevention, and that too digital safety with children and students, because if we start sort of if we look at ways of limiting access, then it can have its repercussions. The second one, it's on how to bring people, because even now the government doesn't seem to be in control of a common agenda. We do have a Digital India program, but the online safety issues, they are still out in the open. Whose responsibility is it? Ministry for Women and Child Development, Ministry of Home Affairs, or MeitY? We still are not very clear. Then also there are issues of gender, there are issues of age, where children are located. We need to understand much more in order to come up with the messages that would be important. Yesterday there was a session on mapping the vulnerabilities, because here the vulnerabilities, the very basis that has been challenged, be it about gender. Here in many instances the offender is also a child. So there we also need to look at whether this is the child a victim or a perpetrator. In some cases he or she may be both, because what kind of baggage does he or she bring in terms of, because the anonymity also allows people, those who are vulnerable, to couch themselves behind the technology, to assume false identities to get even. So we have heard about revenge porn, but it's also about bullying and to get your frustration out for being at the margins. So many kids do not know, most parents certainly do not know that what they are doing could be an offense. But it does, what we know is that it leaves lasting effects on children.
There are lots of areas which, because of the constraints of the TR, couldn't explore further. So, to a root full of organizations working with children and young people, what would you think would be areas of interest within our own sphere which we should probably start researching and studying further, which came up during your study?
The qualitative research for me would be extremely important. We know that the numbers don't really matter. And the qualitative research that could help us gain better understanding of the kind of, or the behavioral patterns. Girls, boys, different age groups, rural, urban, the class. Caste also matters, but here we are talking about caste, because here it's the mobile phone. You may have an iPhone, you may have a Chinese cheap phone for 2,000 bucks. So how is it used? Different ways that children have this ability to adapt themselves, be it by posing as a boy or taking pictures and those little SIM cards and using that to blackmail others. The issues of if you do not fit into the categories of a heterosexual male or a female, that allows you to, number one, to look for information, because in some ways it's important, but in other ways it's also, it exposes you to risk. Now, children who are among the perpetrators, who are they? I was told that one, children who come from dysfunctional families. Okay. The second one, if the age group is quite wide, then it was, I forget, there were other cases, but one which really struck me was a child who's perfect in every way. a very well turned out boy or a girl who doesn't make any mistake. Many of such children have been found to be involved in bullying. It's also the pressures, the social pressure to conform to a certain image, which makes children to be just children and want to do something different. So for me, it was important to listen to the earlier sessions where a lot of thought is going into, and a lot of research is going into understanding the psyche of children who are both the users and the gullible perpetrators, if one may call them. Because there's a very fine line between bullying and teasing. Similarly, if we are talking about getting to know someone and then online grooming. So, how does a child make those decisions whether he or she is in a safe space or not? So, in order to give out those messages, how they should be framed, it's important to know more about the children's world in different contexts, in different socio-economic setups. There would be areas where internet connectivity is poor, but they do manage. How do they do it? What would be the best way of reaching them? Because ultimately, if we have to look at mitigating the problem, we have to begin with the child. Child as a user, child as a social agent, and that's where, if I were to develop a research agenda, I would focus there.
What has been your experience with child welfare committee members?
Not good. Most of them don't know anything. It's more about expecting a certain kind of behavior from children without really understanding who they are, what they're coming from, where they're coming from, and what their motivations are.